Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, is all about looking closely at why people believe in God and asking if it's really necessary. He argues that there's no real proof that God exists and that science gives us a much better way to understand the world around us. Dawkins, who's also famous for his book, The Selfish Gene, writes in a very clear and strong way, saying openly that he doesn't believe in God and encouraging everyone to think for themselves, ask questions, and not just follow beliefs blindly. Dawkins tells a story about his wife. As a child, she hated school, but never told her parents because she felt she wasn't allowed to say it. He says that many people feel stuck in their religion, but don't realize they actually have the choice to leave. He wrote this book, he explains, for those who feel uneasy about religion, but think being an atheist isn't an option. He believes that being an atheist can be a smart, happy, and ethical way to live. The main message of the book is that choosing atheism is a real, brave, and something to be proud of. Dawkins once made a TV show called The Root of All Evil, and even though he didn't like the title, its message was powerful. Imagine a world without religion. The show highlighted the terrible things that have happened because of religion, like the 9/11 attacks, suicide bombings, honor killings, conflicts like the Crusades, and groups like the Taliban. If anyone thinks atheism is just another rigid belief system, Dawkins makes it clear in the book that it's not. Thinking about the idea of God, Dawkins says that the idea of God is like a scientific idea, and it should be looked at and questioned just like any other scientific concept. He carefully breaks down all the common arguments people use to prove God's existence. He explains how Charles Darwin's idea of natural selection can account for why nature looks so perfectly designed without needing a divine creator. For those who think religion must be logical because so many people follow it, Dawkins states that religion's origins are found in history and how our minds work, not in actual truth. He also discusses how people can be moral without needing God. A very important point Dawkins makes is that people often stick with a religion because they were taught it as children. He argues that there's no such thing as a Muslim child or a Christian child. There's only a child of Muslim parents or a child of Christian parents. He believes children should be able to decide their own beliefs instead of just taking on their parents' views. He strongly advises against labeling children by their parents' religion. Dawkins feels that appreciating the amazing beauty of the real world can be just as inspiring as religion, but without all the superstition. He tells atheists to be proud and not feel ashamed, noting that many atheists keep quiet, much like gay people used to hide their identity. Dawkins urges atheists to come out to help others feel strong enough to do the same. He suggests that while there are many atheists, their lack of organization makes them seem less powerful. But if more of them speak up, their combined voices will be heard. The title, The God Delusion, caused some debate among mental health experts, but Dawkins defends it by defining religion as a strong belief without good evidence, which fits his definition of a delusion. He knows that very religious people might not change their minds, but for those who are open to new ideas, the book can help them move away from religion. His hope is that anyone who starts the book as a believer will finish it as an atheist. Science versus old beliefs. Dawkins paints a picture of a child looking at ants, beetles, and roots in the grass, feeling a sense of wonder. This child might later connect that magical feeling to religion and even become a priest. But, he says, if that same feeling were directed towards the stars as Dawkins himself experiences it, it could lead to an interest in science. It's normal to have emotional reactions to nature, but those feelings don't mean we need to believe in supernatural things. As Darwin showed, all life developed through natural rules, and its beauty and wonder are best understood through science, not through the idea of a God. Carl Sagan's idea that religion often makes science seem less important really speaks to Dawkins. Sagan believed that if religion truly understood how huge and amazing the universe is, it would be much more powerful. Dawkins himself is so amazed by nature that some people call him religious, but he makes it clear it's not religion. Physicist Steven Weinberg points out that some people define God so broadly, like saying God is energy, that the word loses its real meaning. Dawkins rejects the idea of God as a supernatural creator to be worshipped, People often misunderstand what Albert Einstein meant when he used the word God. Einstein's God was about the order and structure of the universe, not a personal God. He was a deeply spiritual person who didn't believe in a personal God. For him, religion meant understanding and respecting the natural world, not praying to a being. Einstein clearly said he didn't believe in a personal God. He admired science, not religion. Yet religious people often misquote him to make it seem like he supported their beliefs. Dawkins highlights how this shows that religion is uncomfortable with the truth. Einstein, he concludes, was likely a deist or pantheist, believing in a universal order, but not in a God who answers prayers. Dawkins explains the differences between theist, deist, and pantheist gods. A theist God creates the world and constantly gets involved, punishing, hearing prayers, and performing miracles. A deist God creates the world but then steps back, with no further involvement or miracles. Pantheists use God as a poetic word for nature itself. Dawkins sees pantheism as atheism with fancy words, and deism as a weakened version of theism. Einstein's famous sayings like, "God does not play dice," or "Did God have a choice?" use God as a figure of speech, referring to randomness or universal laws, not a real God. Scientists like Einstein, Stephen Hawking, and Paul Davies sometimes use God in a poetic or metaphorical way, not to suggest a supernatural being. Dawkins finds this risky, as it makes the public think these scientists believe in God when they don't. Einstein admired the universe's beauty, but didn't believe in prayer, miracles, or a personal God. Sagan agreed, asking what's the point of praying to a God who is just the laws of nature. Dawkins advises physicists to avoid using the word God to prevent confusing the public, stressing that Einstein's metaphorical God is completely different from the personal God of the Bible. The God Delusion specifically focuses on supernatural gods like the God of the Old Testament. Dawkins argues that society gives religion a special kind of respect that other ideas don't get. Political or economic opinions are openly debated, but if you question religion, people often say it's a private, sacred matter. Douglas Adams pointed out that some religious ideas simply aren't allowed to be questioned. During wartime, religious people who refuse to fight might get special treatment, while non-religious people who object to war, even with strong moral reasons, face more difficulty. Even hate speech can sometimes be protected under the banner of religious freedom. Dawkins gives the powerful example of the Danish cartoons controversy. A Danish newspaper published cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, which some religious leaders intentionally exaggerated and spread throughout the Islamic world, even adding fake, more offensive pictures. This led to riots, fires, deaths, and burned embassies. In Britain, people held signs saying, "Behead those who insult Islam." One religious leader offered a $1 million reward for the cartoonist, not knowing there were 12 different cartoonists, and the most offensive images weren't even from Denmark. A British Muslim leader said that insulting the Prophet was more important to Muslims than insulting their own parents. Dawkins says that if a religious belief is personal, that's fine, but others aren't obligated to take it seriously. And when they don't, violence often breaks out. If those who insulted the Prophet were truly wrong, Dawkins asks, why don't their gods send them to hell? Why do they resort to violence? He points out the double standards. Muslims protest hurt feelings, but their media openly publishes strong anti-cartoon sentiments. A protest in Pakistan even featured a woman with a "God bless Hitler" sign. Dawkins concludes that he won't deliberately offend religion, but he also won't treat it with kid gloves. Religion should be treated like any other set of beliefs. Dawkins describes the God of the Old Testament as the most unpleasant character in fiction: jealous, cruel, racist, murderous, and sadistic. People become so used to these stories from childhood that the harshness seems normal. He clarifies that he's not targeting any specific God, like the God of the Old Testament, Jesus, or Allah, but rather the God hypothesis. The idea of a supernatural intelligent being with the power to create the universe, including humans. Dawkins argues that if such an intelligent being exists, it would have developed over time, not just appeared fully formed, making the idea of God a delusion or an illusion. Religion, he believes, has changed over time. From tribal gods, animism, to many gods, polytheism, and then to one God, monotheism. People often see believing in one God as progress, but Ibn Warraq suggests that if this trend continues, the next step should be atheism. Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, while claiming to believe in one God, show features of believing in multiple gods. Christianity has the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and Catholicism has saints and Mary. Pope John Paul II even credited Our Lady of Fatima with saving him from a bullet, as if other Our Ladies were too busy. Dawkins points out that religious scholars confidently discuss details with no evidence at all. Ideas like the Trinity are confusing, yet people have fought over them for centuries. The Catholic Church has thousands of saints and angels, with a different one for every problem, all seemingly made up randomly. Dawkins states that all gods, whether 1 or 100, are still gods. He finds it ridiculous when theology is mixed with feminism to decide the gender of a being that doesn't exist. Anthropologists have written interesting books about religion, superstitions, and rituals, but Dawkins focuses on supernatural beliefs that actually affect society, so he concentrates on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Many people say that the God Dawkins doesn't believe in, like an old man with a long beard in the sky, isn't the God they believe in either. Dawkins replies that their real idea of God is just as silly. Judaism, he notes, was a tribal religion with a God who cared a lot about sexual rules, animal sacrifices, and the superiority of their tribe. Christianity softened this tribalism and spread its message to other cultures, while Islam went back to strict monotheism and spread its faith through military power. Christianity also spread by force, with crusades, colonization, and missionaries. Dawkins groups Judaism, Christianity, and Islam together as one family, differing only in their specific ways of believing. He distinguishes between the dice god, who create the universe and then disappears with no miracles or prayers, and the theist god, who gets involved in everything: sins, prayers, miracles, emotions. Dawkins is against all supernatural beliefs, no matter where they come from. Secularism and America. Dawkins questions the idea that America's founding fathers were deists, saying they were clearly secularists who strongly believed in keeping religion separate from government. Senator Barry Goldwater warned against religious groups trying to control moral standards through votes and money. An old treaty from 1797 stated, "The U.S. government is not in any sense Christian," a line that would cause a huge uproar today, but was accepted without argument back then. America is legally secular, yet strangely it has become one of the most religious countries. In contrast, England, which has an official church, treats religion as a relaxed part of life, not a serious belief. Dawkins quotes a vicar who noticed that earlier churchgoers were gentle tea drinkers, but now religion is becoming serious again, which he sees as dangerous. If the founding fathers were alive today, Dawkins believes they would be shocked by modern religious America and would oppose putting up the 10 Commandments in public places. He mentions various sources indicating that Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and James Madison were either atheists, deists, or strong secularists. Jefferson stated that God, angels, and souls are meaningless without evidence, and his nephew encouraged questioning God, believing God would prefer reason over fear. Adams wrote that Christianity's made-up stories made it the bloodiest religion. George Bush Sr.'s comment that atheists couldn't be considered citizens or patriots would cause outrage if said about any other minority group, but atheists are often ignored. Author Natalie Angier noted that atheists feel alone in America, despite being more numerous, simply because they aren't organized. David Mills's shocking story about a faith healer encouraging people to stop taking insulin and chemotherapy shows the danger. When Mills tried to object, police threatened him, with one officer saying, "I came here to spit on you," and another, "You're interfering with God's work." A sergeant added, "To hell with you, atheist." Margaret Downing has documented cases of atheists losing jobs, facing rejection from their families, and even murder. Dawkins believes that if the founding fathers were alive, they would side with secularists like Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, not modern religious leaders who want to mix religion and government. Nehru described religion as blind belief, rigid rules, and exploitation, emphasizing that a country like India could only be united through secularism. How unlikely God is. Dawkins concludes that while a dice god is a better idea than the monstrous God of the Bible, there's no evidence that such a God exists. The idea of God is both unnecessary and very unlikely. He talks about two types of agnosticism: the idea that we can't know if God exists. Temporary agnosticism in practice. This is for questions where we're waiting for evidence, like is there life on other planets? Permanent agnosticism in principle. These are questions that can never be answered, like, is your experience of the color red the same as my experience of red? Dawkins puts the question of God in the tap category, arguing that science might one day provide an answer, making it a topic we can logically discuss. He gives the example of Auguste Comte, who claimed we would never know what stars are made of, only for scientist Joseph Fraunhofer to start analyzing the sun with a special instrument shortly after. Science has often proven never will happen ideas wrong. T.H. Huxley came up with the word agnostic when he was called an infidel. He stated he didn't believe in Jesus and was a person who followed reason. He explained agnosticism not as a belief, but as a way of thinking. Follow reason without other influences, and don't pretend to know things that haven't been proven. Dawkins argues that Huxley missed the point about probability. Unproven doesn't mean both sides are equally likely. God's existence is a scientific idea that can, in theory, be answered. Dawkins presents a 7-level scale of belief in God. Strong believer, 100% sure God exists. De facto believer, believes but not 100% sure. Leaning believer, probably God exists. Pure agnostic, 50-50, no strong opinion either way. Leaning atheist, probably God doesn't exist. De facto atheist, believes God doesn't exist, lives accordingly. Strong atheist, 100% sure God doesn't exist. Dawkins places himself at level 6, leaning towards 7, similar to how he doubts fairies exist. He criticizes pure agnostics for assuming a 50-50 chance, saying that if a question can never be answered, trying to give it a probability is pointless. Bertrand Russell's celestial teapot analogy illustrates this. Just because you can't prove there isn't an unprovable teapot orbiting Mars, doesn't mean its existence is 50% likely. The responsibility to prove something lies with the person who believes it. Just because something can't be proven wrong doesn't mean it's believable, and this applies to tooth fairies, invisible unicorns, or flying spaghetti monsters. The difference with God, Dawkins argues, is that people take the Abrahamic God of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam seriously, which requires discussion, but logically, it's all just teapots. The idea of God is both unnecessary and very unlikely. He talks about two types of agnosticism, the idea that we can't know if God exists. Dawkins challenges the idea that science cannot talk about God's existence. If God exists, the universe would be different in certain ways, making it a scientific question. Stephen Jay Gould's idea of noma, non-overlapping magisteria, which suggests that science deals with facts and religion deals with meaning and morals, with no overlap, is directly challenged by Dawkins. How, he asks, does religion truly answer questions about ultimate meaning? If science can't answer something, it doesn't automatically mean religion can. Some why questions are nonsensical. For example, why are unicorns hollow? Even for real questions, science has better tools than theologians. If science can't answer something, Dawkins says, religion has no right to either. Theologians are only allowed to speak on deep topics because no one has taken away their microphone. Morality, too, is often kept separate from scientific examination, but Dawkins argues that religion shouldn't have the right to dictate what's right and wrong. Whose morality should we follow? Which holy book? The Bible's rules are unacceptable today. For example, rules about adultery or what you can touch on the Sabbath. If we reject some rules, on what basis? If there's an independent way to decide what's moral, why take religion's shortcut? Dawkins believes that scientists like Gould made a mistake by letting religion be free from scientific comment on God's existence. God is a scientific idea. If an intelligent designer performs miracles and breaks natural laws, that's something that can be tested. If Jesus' DNA showed no father, would religious people say science is irrelevant? No, they'd shout it as proof. This inconsistency is clear. They use evidence when it supports them, but claim noma when it doesn't. Miracles, a strong foundation for religion, go against science. The Catholic Church takes miracles seriously for sainthood, even literally checking for prayers and miracles. Sophisticated theologians might be embarrassed by this, but they stay in the church. Gould agreed that claiming a miracle breaks the noma rule. But everyday religious people expect God to get involved and perform miracles. Ambrose Bierce defined prayer as to ask that the laws of the universe be annulled in behalf of a single petitioner, confidentially unworthy. People genuinely believe God helped them win a game or find a parking spot. Such beliefs make a God who performs no miracles useless. Even if God is redefined to a very minimal version, no miracles, no prayers, just a cosmic push at the universe's beginning, it's still a scientific idea. A universe that developed gradually through evolution is fundamentally different from one designed by an intelligent agent. Evolution explains complexity bit by bit, without needing divine intervention, which is a fatal blow to the idea of God. Dawkins mentions Francis Galton's early experiment on prayer. Do members of the royal family who are prayed for live longer? No difference was found. A larger study paid for by the Templeton Foundation, led by Dr. Herbert Benson, involved 1802 heart patients in 3 groups. Those prayed for who didn't know it, those not prayed for who didn't know it, and those prayed for who knew it. There was no difference in outcomes between the prayed for and non-prayed for groups. Those who knew they were being prayed for actually had more complications, possibly because of anxiety. Am I so sick they're praying for me? Some theologians argued that God only answers sincere prayers, not random experiments. Richard Swinburne claimed God sends illness to build patience or encourage empathy. This twisted logic made Peter Atkins famously tell Swinburne, "May you rot in hell." Theologians argued that if prayer gave clear proof, the value of faith would decrease. But Dawkins counters that if the study succeeded, religious people would cheer it. If it failed, they'd say science has nothing to do with religion. In America, science, especially evolution, is attacked by powerful, well-funded groups who believe in creationism. Some scientists support NOMA to get religious moderates on their side against creationism. Philosopher Michael Roos, an atheist, believes scientists unnecessarily insult sympathetic Christians. Dawkins calls the Pope's support for Darwinism hypocritical, a deal with the devil like Winston Churchill and Franklin D. Roosevelt with Joseph Stalin. Jerry Coyne, a geneticist, disagrees, stating the real fight is between logical thinking and superstition, with religion being the biggest superstition. Dawkins, like creationists, rejects NOMA. He knows his name is used to make atheism look bad. If asked in court if evolution made him an atheist, he'd have to say yes, which would be used against him. Dawkins points out that scientists who try to reconcile science and religion aren't being dishonest, but they often hold contradictory beliefs without realizing it. He uses the famous analogy of Russell's teapot to illustrate the burden of proof. If someone claimed there's a tiny teapot orbiting the sun, invisible and undetectable, we'd laugh. But if the claim were about life in space, we'd take it seriously, because that's a question science can eventually answer. Agnosticism is reasonable when evidence is possible. That's why Dawkins compares this to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI. Scientists working in SETI calculate the odds of alien civilizations using probabilities even with many unknowns. And science is catching up. Tools like Doppler spectroscopy have already helped discover over 170 exoplanets, most of them gas giants, because they're easier to detect. Step by step, science reduces the unknown and chips away at what used to be justified agnosticism. Dawkins believes the same approach applies to the idea of God. Science may not yet have definitive answers, but it can estimate probabilities. For example, imagine a radio telescope picking up signals from an alien civilization. Their technology might appear magical to us. This ties in with Arthur C. Clarke's famous quote, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." But that doesn't make them gods. Dawkins insists, No matter how advanced, aliens, if they exist, would still be part of nature. They wouldn't have magically appeared. They'd have evolved through some form of natural selection. That's a key difference. Here, Daniel Dennett's terms come into play. Cranes are real, step-by-step explanations like evolution. Skyhooks are magical shortcuts, like invoking God to explain complexity. Natural selection, Dawkins says, is the crane that builds complexity and beauty without needing a divine designer. Then Dawkins moves on to dismantle classical arguments for God's existence, starting with Thomas Aquinas's 5 proofs from the 13th century. The first 3 are really variations on one theme, the unmoved mover. Everything is moved by something else, so there must be a first mover God. The uncaused cause. Every effect has a cause, so there must be a first cause God. The cosmological argument. Since physical things haven't always existed, something non-physical must have created them. God. But Dawkins challenges this logic. These arguments rely on halting the chain of causes by inserting God. Yet that just raises another question. Why is God exempt from needing a cause? If the chain must have a beginning, why not stop at something like the Big Bang, which at least has a scientific basis? And there's another contradiction. If God is all-knowing and all-powerful, there's a logical problem. If God already knows everything that will happen, he can't change it, so he's not all-powerful. But if he can change it, then he didn't truly know the future. Either way, something doesn't add up. Next, Dawkins tackles more traditional arguments for the existence of God, one by one. First, the argument from degree. This claims that since everything varies in goodness, there must be something that is perfectly good, a maximum of goodness, and that supposedly is God. But Dawkins points out how absurd this logic is. By the same reasoning, one could argue that the smelliest thing must exist and call that God. Then there's the teleological argument, also known as the design argument. It says that the world looks designed, so it must have had a designer God. But Darwin's theory of natural selection completely undermines this. Evolution shows how the illusion of design can emerge without any guiding intelligence. Complexity doesn't need a divine creator. It can arise naturally. Next comes the more abstract ontological argument, first proposed by Saint Anselm in 1078. It tries to prove God using logic alone. Anselm imagined a perfect being. He reasoned that if such a being existed only in the mind, it wouldn't be truly perfect. So to be perfect, it must also exist in reality. Dawkins calls this a clever word game. Even the philosopher Immanuel Kant rejected it, stating that existence is not a trait or a perfection. To show just how silly this logic can get, philosopher Douglas Gasking offered a parody. The greatest possible creator would be one who didn't even exist, because creating the universe while being non-existent would be an even more impressive feat. It's satire, but it exposes the flawed reasoning behind the ontological argument. Some people try to use math or science to prove God, but this often just leads to confusion or nonsense. One example, the supposed equation from mathematician Leonhard Euler, a plus bn over n equals x, which he was said to use to silence Denis Diderot. This wasn't a proof, it was a joke, but it's sometimes cited as if it means something profound. Others argue that since matter can't be destroyed, it proves eternal life. That's not science, it's a misunderstanding of physics. Dawkins also reviews what he calls super funny proofs for God's existence. For example, a child survives a plane crash, therefore, God exists. If the world were even slightly different, everything would be terrible, so God must have made it just right. This is just assuming a cause after the effect, not real logic. Other favorites include, I believe, so God must exist? That's just circular reasoning. And finally, God loves you. How can you be so heartless not to believe? That's not an argument, it's emotional blackmail. People claim that Beethoven's music or Shakespeare's plays prove God, but Dawkins says they only prove the artist's talent. Artists like Michelangelo and Raphael often work for the church because that's where the money and commissions were. If they'd been paid to decorate science museums, their work might have been equally inspiring. Dawkins notes he's never heard a Mesozoic symphony or evolution oratorio. If Shakespeare had worked for the church, we might never have had Hamlet or Macbeth. Many people believe in God because of feelings or voices. Dawkins' friend thought he heard the devil's voice in a tent, but an ornithologist identified it as a Manx shearwater, also called a devil bird. People's experiences of seeing God, hearing voices, or visions of the Virgin Mary may be real for them, but they aren't convincing for others. George Bush claimed God told him to invade Iraq. The Yorkshire Ripper also claimed Jesus told him to kill women, but we call them mad. The only difference with religion is that more people believe, making it seem normal. Sam Harris has pointed out that someone who hears God's thoughts is religious, but someone who hears God tap dancing in Morse code is mentally ill. The brain, which is a great simulator, creates illusions. Dawkins shares personal experiences of misinterpreting wind for ghosts or curtain patterns for faces. Mass hallucinations, like the Fatima event in 1917, where 70,000 people claimed to see the sun fall, are not convincing because the rest of the world saw nothing unusual. David Hume argued that a miracle should only be believed if its falsehood would be an even greater miracle. The problem with holy books and sacred scientists. Many people use the Bible or other holy scriptures as proof. C.S. Lewis's liar, lunatic, or Lord argument is seen as silly by Dawkins, who adds another option: honestly mistaken. The main problem is the weak historical proof of Jesus' divinity. Who wrote the scriptures? When? And what was their purpose? Were they unbiased observers? Do we interpret their language as they intended? 19th century scholars show the Gospels are unreliable, written after Jesus' death and even after Paul's letters, which barely mention Jesus' life. Gospels were copied and changed by scribes with religious goals. The story of Jesus' birth in Bethlehem was likely made up to fulfill an Old Testament prophecy. Matthew says Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Luke says he was from Nazareth, but went to Bethlehem for a census that historically never happened at that time. Luke's version is historically inaccurate. Scholars like A.N. Wilson and Robin Lane Fox highlight inconsistencies and contradictions between Matthew and Luke's birth stories. Elements of the Christmas story, virgin birth, star, wise men, resurrection, were borrowed from existing religions. Matthew focused on a Jewish audience, Luke on non-Jews. People who believe the Bible is literally true often haven't read it properly. For example, Matthew and Luke give different family trees for Joseph. And if Jesus was born of a virgin, Joseph's lineage is irrelevant anyway. Bart Ehrman showed that the New Testament texts are unreliable and easily changed, which led to his own loss of faith. Some scholars even suggest Jesus never existed. Thomas Jefferson believed the virgin birth would one day be seen like Greek mythology. The Da Vinci Code is fiction, but Gospels are ancient fiction. The argument, if scientists like Newton, Galileo, etc. were religious, then who are you to be better, is common. The famous story of Darwin converting to Christianity on his deathbed is false. In the 19th century, being religious was a social norm. Some famous scientists like Michael Faraday were members of religious groups that washed feet and sought God's decisions. Lord Kelvin and James Clerk Maxwell were Christians, but Kelvin's claim about the Earth's age was later proven wrong. Today, some modern scientists like John Polkinghorne are religious, often winners of the Templeton Prize, but their beliefs puzzle their colleagues. Francis Collins, a religious scientist involved in the Human Genome Project, is a rare exception. James Watson, in an interview with Dawkins, noted that religious scientists are almost non-existent. Accepting truth through divine revelation is strange. Francis Crick resigned his fellowship when his college built a chapel. Watson said, "We weren't made for any purpose. We're just products of evolution." He ended with, "Now let's have lunch." Some websites list religious Nobel laureates, but many are wrongly identified or not actually Nobel winners. A study in the journal Nature found that only 7% of U.S. National Academy of Sciences members believe in God, compared to 90% of the general public. British Royal Society studies show only 3.3% strongly believe in a personal God, while 78.8% strongly disagree. Biologists are even more likely to be atheists. The conclusion: the more knowledge you have, the less likely you are to believe. Studies show higher education and intelligence are linked to lower religiosity. Interest in science also correlates with lower religiosity. People with more liberal political views are less religious. Children usually adopt their parents' religion, with only 1 in 12 British children choosing a different path. A 2002 analysis of 43 studies found that 39 clearly showed that a higher IQ meant less religious belief. Pascal's wager and the problem of evil. Pascal's wager is an argument that says, if you believe in God and God exists, you get an eternal reward. If God doesn't exist, you lose nothing. If you don't believe and God exists, you face eternal damnation. So, it's safer to believe. Dawkins argues that belief isn't something you can just switch on. It can't be forced. If God is all-knowing, he'll see through fake belief. Perhaps God prefers people who seek truth over those who just believe. Bertrand Russell noted there isn't enough evidence for God, and if you choose the wrong God, the ancient god Baal instead of the God of the Bible, it becomes even riskier. The anti-Pascal's wager suggests that if God doesn't exist, wasting time worshiping is a loss. Stephen Unwin used Bayes' theorem to calculate the probability of God's existence, starting with a 50-50 chance, then adding factors like the human sense of goodness, evil acts, natural disasters, small miracles, large miracles, and spiritual experiences. His final answer was a 67% chance that God exists, but he wanted it higher, so he injected faith to reach 95%. This logic, Dawkins says, is, I believe because I choose to, not because of evidence. Unwin didn't take the design argument seriously. He claimed goodness is proof of God, but Dawkins says our moral sense is separate from God. Natural disasters, Unwin said, argue against God, but Darwin noted they only argue against a good God. The existence of God doesn't prove that God is good. Theologians struggle with the problem of evil, but a simple way around it is to propose an evil God, or blame Satan, or say God is busy, or that human suffering is the price of free will. Dawkins remembers Atkins' "May you rot in hell" comment in response to Swinburne's twisted logic. Swinburne and theologians argue that if prayer gave proof, faith's value would go down. But Dawkins points out that if a study succeeded, they'd celebrate it. But if it failed, they'd say science has nothing to do with religion. The illusion of design and the multiverse. The main argument against God's existence, according to Dawkins, is that the complexity of life itself argues against God. Just as a hurricane can't accidentally put together a Boeing 747 airplane in a scrapyard, complex life can't arise randomly. But this ignores natural selection, which is a step-by-step filtering process, not randomness. People who believe in creationism misunderstand natural selection as pure chance. If complex life needs a designer, then God, the designer, would have to be even more complex and improbable. So believing in God doesn't solve the problem, it makes it bigger. God becomes the ultimate Boeing 747 with almost zero chance of existing. Darwin's theory not only explained life, but also changed how people think. Douglas Adams became an atheist after reading Dawkins's book, finding evolution's simplicity and clarity more profound than religious beliefs. Darwinism disproved the wrong idea that only intelligent beings can create complex things. Now, we know nature can create complexity gradually without conscious design. Astronomy shows how tiny and unimportant we are, geology shows how recently we appeared, and Darwinism explains the illusion of design. This way of thinking applies to physics and cosmology too. If God just created the universe and then let natural selection take over, why would such a God even exist? It's a God that doesn't do any work, making its existence meaningless. Creationists often point to sponges, flower traps, redwood trees, and photosynthesis as too complex to have developed without a designer. But these are false choices between chance and design. Darwin offered a real, elegant solution. Natural selection builds complexity step by step. Dawkins uses the analogy of a mountain of improbability. Creationists think life just jumped to the top, while evolution climbs a slow, steady slope. The all-or-nothing thinking of irreducible complexity is flawed. Half a wing is better than no wing. A half eye provides basic vision. Nature shows examples of every stage of development, from flatworms with simple light-detecting eyes to human eyes, all on a gradual ladder. This is the slope of Mount Improbable. The argument that removing a part of a wing or eye makes the whole system fail is wrong. Darwin said, if anything existed that couldn't have arisen by gradual steps, his theory would fail. Nothing like that has been found. If a system is too complex to explain, saying God made it is flawed, as God himself would be an irreducibly complex entity needing an explanation. When science admits it doesn't know something, creationists jump in with God did it, a default God of the gaps, which isn't part of science or logic. These gaps are shrinking and God has less place to hide. Scientists say, I don't know, and then investigate. Creationists say, I don't know means God, and fill the gap with imagination. One approach builds knowledge, the other fills with made-up ideas. If scientists say, I don't know how it evolved, creationists say, see, God made it. But scientists are just offering a research idea. In science, I don't know is honesty. In intelligent design, it's an excuse. Jerry Coyne's quote, whenever we label our ignorance God, science stops. If God designed everything, why are there flaws? The recurrent laryngeal nerve's long detour, lower back pain, hernias, sinus issues, all are evolutionary baggage. Our bodies, which evolved for walking on 4 legs, face problems when we walk upright. Predators and prey seem perfectly designed, but if God made them, whose side was he on? Eyes, wings, flagellar motors, all were once thought to be irreducibly complex, but these arguments have been disproven. New examples are declared without actual analysis. I can't understand how this happened doesn't mean God did it. It's like saying a magic trick is supernatural. Being naive and jumping to conclusions aren't science. Natural selection builds complexity step by step. Design and chance fail. Intelligent design is based on personal confusion. Science's job is to understand gaps, not fill them with God. The origin of life is often pointed to as the ultimate example of something incredibly unlikely, as it seems to have happened only once. However, Dawkins argues that extreme improbability is acceptable for a unique event. We are on Earth, which is obviously able to support life. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here to observe it. Planets with liquid water might be rare, but we happen to be on one. Jupiter blocking asteroids, the moon stabilizing Earth's tilt, these seem perfect but aren't proof of design. Martin Rees suggests an infinite number of universes, each with different laws. We are in the one where life is possible. The serial multiverse theory, Big Crunch, suggests universes expand, contract, and then are reborn with new laws. However, recent evidence suggests the universe might expand forever, making this model less likely. Lee Smolin's Darwinian multiverse theory suggests black holes create new universes with slightly changed physical constants, like inheritance. Universes that produce more black holes reproduce more, indirectly favoring life. Some physicists dislike this, but Nobel laureate Murray Gell-Mann said Smolin might not be wrong. Some argue that if the multiverse is extravagant, then God should also be allowed. But the multiverse, despite its vastness, is simple in its underlying principles. The God hypothesis is complex because God himself is a highly improbable entity that creates a bigger question instead of an answer. Richard Swinburne claims God is simple because one being controls everything. He argues that electrons being all alike is too coincidental. It would be better if they were all different, implying God continuously controls them. Dawkins says this isn't simplicity, it's extreme complexity. If God cares for every electron, atom, human, and alien, how is that simple? Dawkins emphasizes that any honest explanation must be a crane, not a skyhook. A crane is a real, gradual, step-by-step explanation. A skyhook is a sudden, magical appearance without a process. In biology, Darwin's natural selection is a powerful crane. In cosmology, a crane is still missing, but inflation theory or the multiverse might offer some. Even with weak cranes, the anthropic principle that the universe's laws are just right for us to exist, combined with weak cranes, are better than the God hypothesis. Therefore, if this argument is accepted, the factual basis of religion, the God hypothesis, fails, and God almost certainly does not exist. Morality without God. If God doesn't exist, is religion still useful? Does it provide comfort or a source of morality? Why is religion found in every culture? Dawkins explores these questions. Religion takes up a lot of time, energy, and resources. Natural selection usually gets rid of such waste, unless it serves a purpose, like a peacock's tail or a bowerbird's nest attracting mates. If a behavior, like birds flying into an open barn, continues, it must have a benefit. Every culture has religious beliefs and rituals, like witchcraft, fasting, or self-punishment. What's the evolutionary advantage of religion, similar to sex for reproduction? Dawkins offers 3 evolutionary explanations for religious behavior. Individual gene benefit. A ritual or belief helps an individual survive or reproduce better. Parasite gene benefit. Religion benefits someone else's genes, like a parasite or another organism, as an extended effect of their genes. Religion as a replicator meme. Religion exists simply to spread itself. People in Papua New Guinea are experts at living in the jungle, but are full of belief in witchcraft and magical fear. How can a species be so smart and so foolish? Some evidence suggests that religion reduces stress and improves health, but this could be a placebo effect, like homeopathy or a doctor's reassurance. George Bernard Shaw said believers are happier than skeptics, but a drunk person is happier than a sober one. Religion explaining the universe or providing comfort are psychological, immediate reasons. But we need evolutionary explanations. How did this tendency develop and why? Rulers used religion for control, which might be true, but why did people accept it in the first place? Some argue that religion benefits the group, not just the individual. A religious tribe that loves war might defeat a peaceful one. Their belief makes them brave and willing to sacrifice, improving the group's survival and spread. Dawkins and George C. Williams do not support group selection. Group selection, the idea that entire groups are selected, usually fails because selection at the individual level is more powerful. If one individual is selfish and hides behind martyrs, their selfish genes will spread more. Darwin explained group-like behavior, but it wasn't true group selection. More cooperative tribes simply grew larger, like gray squirrels replacing red squirrels. Dawkins views religion as a side effect or a mistake of something else, not a direct evolutionary advantage. Moths dying in a candle flame are actually trying to navigate by the moon's angle. The candle confuses their internal compass. For children, blindly obeying elders is crucial for survival, e.g., stay away from the cliff, don't go near crocodile water. But this same blind trust can lead to accepting nonsense like sacrifice to God on the full moon. Children's brains are easily programmed like computers. They follow whatever program is installed. Just as computer viruses are misused, mind viruses, religious ideas, can infect children. The Jesuits' motto, "Give me the child for the first 7 years, and I will give you the man." And James Dobson's assertion that whoever controls what is taught to children determines a nation's future, highlight this. Religious leaders know this and target children early. Just as languages develop differently, so do beliefs. Each culture passes its sacred nonsense to future generations because children are so trusting. Religion is like a virus that takes advantage of a child's trusting nature. To understand its origin, religion should be seen as a psychological misfiring, not as truth or a necessary function. Evolutionary psychology suggests the brain is made of many specialized parts for kinship, empathy, taking turns. Religion might be a misfiring of these parts, like our ability to guess what others are thinking or how we form groups and think about us versus them. Paul Bloom believes humans, especially children, are naturally dualists, meaning they think the mind and body are separate, so ideas like a soul and afterlife are easily accepted. Children see purpose in everything, teleology, like clouds making rain or rocks being there for animals to scratch. These tendencies, dualism plus teleology, create fertile ground for religion. Daniel Dennett's 3 ways to predict behavior, physical, design, intentional, are relevant. The intentional stance is fast. If you see a tiger, you immediately assume it wants to eat you. You don't think about its physics, Children also quickly detect intentional agents, even in moving dots on a screen. This overactive detection of intentions can be a foundation for religion. Dennett and Helen Fisher suggest that irrational loyalty to a partner is useful for raising children. It makes you ignore other options, even logical ones. Religious devotion is similarly blind and irrational. Only the object changes: God, Mary. John Smithies believes religion provides intense emotional rewards like love, protection, and comfort, similar to how romantic love gives emotional highs from letters or photos. Lewis Wolpert's theory suggests strong irrational beliefs can be useful. Constantly changing your opinions leads to failure in using tools or hunting. Irrational conviction can be an evolutionary advantage. Robert Triver's self-deception theory suggests that deceiving oneself makes deception harder for others to detect. The more convincingly you believe a lie, the more convincingly you can tell it without being nervous. Lionel Tiger and Robert Trivers noted that people see what they want to see, making negative things harder to notice. Religion could be a result of this wishful thinking. Religion is a misfire, not a direct adaptation. It's a mental virus that enters children's brains directly. Children believe what they hear, whether it's avoiding crocodiles or sacrificing goats. The nonsense learned in childhood infects the next generation. The specific content can be anything. Dawkins states that religions are a result of cultural changes and selective spreading, where randomness and shared human psychology create similar religious features like an afterlife and a soul. These ideas spread because they feed wishful thinking. Religious leaders know what helps faith survive. Martin Luther said, "Reason is the enemy of faith." But religion's design wasn't intentional. It's the natural selection of memes. Memes are cultural replicators. Genes are in DNA. Memes are in ideas, habits, languages, rituals. Genes show their impact through physical traits, memes through behaviors and rituals. Meme pools don't have a rigid structure, but the frequency of memes changes. Some copy themselves better. Dawkins states memes aren't exactly like genes, but similar enough for meme theory to explain religion. Religion is a complex group of memes made up of emotions, fear, wishful thinking, and childhood teaching. Just as gene pools have cartels, carnivores need claws, herbivores need enzymes, meme pools have compatible memes that support each other. Yagam, how language sounds changed over time. Religious memes survive independently or through the support of their meme group. You live after death if you become a martyr. 72 virgins in paradise. Punish those who criticize religion. Belief in God is the greatest virtue. If you doubt, work on yourself. Faith without proof is best. The more belief against evidence, the greater the reward. Religion deserves more respect than other beliefs. Some things are not meant to be understood. Enjoy them as mysteries. Art, music, and scriptures become replicating memes themselves. Islam and Buddhism are different groups of memes. Dawkins says no religion is inherently better. They just flourish within their meme groups. Their design wasn't conscious. It was unconscious evolution of ideas. The human brain is like a software platform with psychological biases, which religion takes advantage of. Scientology and Mormonism were designed by individuals, but most religions evolve like meme ecosystems. The cargo cults of New Guinea show how new religions can start quickly and how their origins become unclear. Local people, seeing white people receive cargo without apparent effort, believed it was supernatural and that white people's rituals, like marching or using fake radios, summoned it. Natives copied these rituals, building dummy airstrips, wooden headphones, and fake control towers, hoping for cargo. A messiah figure, John Frum, promised planes full of cargo from America. These cults show how quickly new religions form, how their beginnings become foggy, and how human psychology creates similar patterns. Jesus might have been part of such a cult that survived. The rapid formation of cults after the deaths of figures like Haile Selassie, Elvis Presley, and Princess Diana further illustrates fast meme evolution, being good without God. Dawkins brings up the question, why are people good if there's no religion? Many religious people can't imagine goodness without it, which often leads to their dislike of non-believers. Opposing evolution often comes from a moral outrage. Fearing children will act like monkeys if they learn they descended from them. Richard Dawkins and atheist filmmakers receive hateful mail, often violent and threatening, from religious individuals. The irony is that these Christians act in very unchristian ways. Religion is used to justify violence, with threats like "my rifle is loaded." One letter writer claimed atheism is meaningless, leading to suicide, drugs, violence, and war, arguing that believing in religion is better even if false, as it brings peace and hope. Dawkins calls this a misunderstanding. Atheism isn't hopelessness. Can natural selection explain goodness? Hunger, fear, and lust are easily explained by evolution. But compassion, empathy, or sending tsunami relief to strangers, how do these arise? Dawkins clarifies that selfish gene means genes preserve themselves, not that individual organisms are selfish. Genes are the things that are favored by natural selection to copy themselves. Two types of helping behavior are explained by evolution. Kin selection, caring for offspring or family, evolves because they share genes, e.g. bees and ants caring for colony members. Reciprocal altruism, you help me, I help you. Mutual need leads to exchanging help. For example, bees and flowers, honey guides and honey badgers, vampire bats sharing blood based on who helped last. What about those who cheat? Game theory suggests that always being nasty can be a stable strategy, but the best strategy is tit for tat, start nice, help others but punish cheats. This strategy is stable in evolution. In human society, gossip and language spread reputations. Generous people gain good reputations. Natural selection favors those who are reciprocal and have good names. In some cases, giving is a sign of dominance or status, like the potlatch effect, where chiefs give lavish gifts to show their power. Amat Sahavi and Thorstein Veblen suggest that helping others can be a way to boost one's ego and show off socially. Generosity in Arabian babblers, where dominant birds feed subordinates, is a sign of superiority. Costly generosity can only be afforded by truly superior individuals, making it an honest signal of fitness. There are 4 evolutionary reasons for helping others. Sacrifice for relatives, reciprocal helping, I help you today, you help me tomorrow. Reputation, being seen as generous increases status. Costly signaling, generosity as an honest advertisement of power. Early humans lived in small groups, mostly family or familiar individuals, so all 4 reasons naturally developed. Kinship was central. Repeated interactions allowed for reciprocal helping. Reputation mattered, and generosity was a way to show off. Today, we live among strangers but are still kind because natural selection created general rules of thumb that were useful back then and are still active. These rules are passed down through literature, law, culture, tradition, and religion. Jonathan Haidt showed that human morality comes from evolved moral instincts, not from religion. People give similar answers to moral problems like the trolley problem, regardless of their religion. Reasoning is hard, but decisions are similar because morality is a subconscious rule. The trolley problem illustrates this. Dennis, a runaway trolley, is heading for 5 people. Dennis can pull a switch to send it onto a sidetrack with 1 person. Most people say pulling the switch is okay. Fat man, to stop the trolley, one must push a fat man off a bridge. Most people say this is wrong. Organ harvest. In a hospital, a healthy patient's organs could save 5 others. Most people say, don't murder him. How do we make these moral choices? Immanuel Kant's rule, don't use a human solely as a tool. In Dennis's case, the man on the sidetrack is just caught in the crossfire. In Fat Man and Organ Harvest, the person is directly used, which feels wrong. Dawkins finds the question, if there's no God, why be good? Tiresome. When religious people ask it, it suggests their morality only comes from fear of God's punishment or wanting a reward. If you're good only out of fear, you're not truly good. You're just afraid of being watched. Einstein agreed, if humanity is only good out of fear of reward or punishment, it's a sad state. Michael Shermer's point, if you say you'd steal and loot without God, you're dangerous. If you say you'd still be good, you've proven God isn't needed for goodness. Many believe their morality comes from religion, but it's often a programming based on guilt. Dawkins discusses Fyodor Dostoevsky's character, Ivan Karamazov, who thought that if belief in an afterlife disappeared, people would lose love and morality and everything would be permitted, even cannibalism. Is human nature truly only good because of being watched? The 1969 Montreal police strike saw looting, murder, and arson. But most people there believed in God, so they should have been good, right? H.L. Mencken said that when people say they need religion, they really mean they need police. If God doesn't exist, how are good and evil decided? Does morality only come from religion? Otherwise, everyone makes their own moral rules, like Hitler. Dawkins discusses absolutist versus consequentialist morality. Absolutists. Religion-based, fixed rules, some things are always wrong. Consequentialists, like Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, judge actions by their outcomes, aiming for the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Kant's approach, duty for duty's sake. Lying is wrong because if everyone lied, lying would lose its meaning. Selfishness also breaks down if it were a universal rule. Dawkins says scriptures offer morality through direct rules, like the Ten Commandments, or by example, God or biblical characters as role models. But both approaches, if followed exactly, are horrible today. The Bible is a collection of writings by hundreds of authors over 900 years. Much of it strange, yet religious people take it literally. Even liberal Christians like Bishop John Shelby Spong and Bishop David Jenkins Holloway admit people haven't properly read or understood the Bible. The Noah's Ark story, God drowning everyone but one family, including innocent children and animals, is called cherry-picking by Dawkins when religious people say Genesis shouldn't be taken literally. Blaming natural disasters on human sins is self-centered. Religion has always been a dividing force. Northern Ireland, Palestine, India, where deep hatred exists, religion is a label for the groups. The partition of India killed over 1 million people. Rafik stated that religion is the poison in India's blood. The in-group versus out-group bias is natural in humans, e.g. football fans. But religion makes it worse in 3 ways. Labeling children, Catholic mind, Muslim child. Separate schools, religious segregation. Taboo against marrying outside the religion. People think their morality comes from religion, but it doesn't. Most people, religious or not, follow a common, modern moral code. Don't kill, don't cheat, freedom of speech. These are universal values. Holy books contain some good, but also so much harmful material that they can't be a solid basis for morality. H.G. Wells in 1902 wrote about eliminating inferior races for humanity's improvement. Acceptable dinner table talk back then. Read it today, and people think of Hitler, but he wasn't far from the moral standards of his time. This shift happened through media, conversations, books, and the internet spreading memes, ideas. News, TV, comedy, and laws reflect changing values. Some people are ahead, some behind, but society generally moves forward, though sometimes with some sortum. The driver of this shift? Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi, some religious, some not. Gandhi's influence came from human values, not religion. Education, especially biology and evolution, showed our shared humanity. Peter Singer advocates a post-speciesist world where animals are treated humanely, just like slaves or women were emancipated. People often bring up Hitler and Stalin being atheists. Dawkins says this question assumes 2 things. Hitler and Stalin were atheists. Stalin was, Hitler's religious views are debated and unclear. Their evil deeds were because of their atheism. This is false. Being an atheist doesn't make one evil. Otherwise, all mustachioed people would be evil, as both Hitler and Stalin had mustaches. The logic fails. George Carlin's definition of religion, an invisible man in the sky who watches everything you do, has 10 rules, and if you break any, he sends you to a fiery place of torture and smoke forever, but he loves you. Dawkins states he's not naturally confrontational and avoids debates. Yet people ask why he's so hostile to religion. Is religion so harmful that speaking against it is necessary? Am I a fundamentalist atheist like some religious fundamentalists? Fundamentalists believe their holy book is absolute truth, rejecting any evidence that contradicts it. Scientists, however, base their beliefs on evidence. Science books aren't holy and are meant to be corrected. If new evidence disproves a theory, scientists abandon it. Does religion fill a God-shaped gap or occupy it with useless things? Religion has 4 traditional roles. Explanation, understanding the world and life, now taken over by science. Exhortation, moral teaching, already discussed. Consolation, comfort in sorrow. Inspiration, motivation. We've covered explanation and exhortation. Now consolation and inspiration. A. Milne's poem Pinker describes an invisible friend who keeps a child from feeling alone. Some children believe imaginary friends are real, which borders on hallucination. God plays a similar role, an invisible friend, advisor, and listener. A girl who saw a little purple man who advised her to go to university shows how imagination can provide real comfort. Is God a grown-up Pinker? Some childhood traits are kept into adulthood. Perhaps belief in God is one, or perhaps gods once seemed real, then imaginary, and now are limited to childhood. Both are likely byproducts of a psychological tendency, a need for comfort, conversation, and imagination. People ask, if there's no God, what about dying patients, lonely people? Dawkins says comfort doesn't mean truth. Santa Claus also gives comfort, but that's not evidence he exists. People believe in the act of believing itself, not necessarily the actual content of the belief, but they want others to believe. Atheists are happy. Believers are happy. There's no solid data that religion always leads to greater happiness. The question is, can we live fulfilling lives without God? Dawkins says yes, physical comfort, a dog or human hug, and mental reframing, a new way of looking at things, are two types of consolation. Shakespeare's 7 Ages of Man, where each age gradually passes into the next, means death is just another transition. Mark Twain joked he'd been dead for billions of years before, and it was fine. Thomas Jefferson feared no afterlife. Bertrand Russell said that when he dies, he'll just rot. The value of happiness isn't lessened by its end. Truth isn't about feelings. God's comfort might be real, but it doesn't prove God's existence. Life without God can be meaningful, comforting, and fulfilling. The fresh air of science can be more invigorating than the old mythological warmth. Dawkins notes that human brains are built to understand things of middle-range sizes and speeds. Science takes us to the quantum and cosmic worlds, far beyond what our ancestors needed to survive. Our imagination is limited to the middle world. We imagine electrons as tiny balls, but they aren't. They are unlike anything we truly know. The truth is beyond our common sense. Richard Feynman said, "If you think you understand quantum theory, you don't." Predictions are precise, but real understanding escapes us. In the middle world, what's outside seems strange. Schrodinger's cat is an example, dead or alive until observed. The Copenhagen interpretation says truth becomes definite when observed. The many worlds interpretation says every possibility is real in a separate universe. Dawkins jokes he's dead in one universe, stroking his green mustache in another. Lewis Wolpert says science goes against common sense at every turn. When you drink water, a molecule you drink may have passed through Oliver Cromwell's bladder. Molecules travel globally. Carl Sagan's quote, "When you're in love, you want to tell the world." Similarly for science, Darwin opened a small window in the human brain, revealing how life works. Life's existence seems impossibly rare, yet here we are. People thought the sun revolved around Earth because it looked that way. Ludwig Wittgenstein asked how it would look different if Earth revolved around the sun. Rocks and crystals are mostly empty space between atoms, yet they feel hard because force fields prevent parts from entering each other. A general thinking he could walk through a wall because both are made of atoms ran into it. We can't truly understand quantum or cosmic sizes because we weren't designed for that scale. A neutrino can easily pass through a wall, but we can't grasp it. Logic and intuition fail at speeds near light. We understand gravity, insects understand surface tension. We only consider solid things real. Waves or vacuum fluctuations seem unreal because our ancestors didn't deal with them. Dawkins concludes that in vast amounts of time and space, even impossible events become possible. A rare event like the origin of life could occur given enough time and planets. Evolution has given our middle world brains the ability to understand unimaginable things through science. Some things might always be beyond our full comprehension, or perhaps we can understand them with enough training. Dawkins expresses joy at living in a time when humanity is breaking limits.